Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing another really fascinating guest today, involved in creating a better tomorrow. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Debra Whitman, who is Executive Vice President and Chief Public Policy Officer at AARP. There she leads policy development, analysis, and research, as well as the global thought leadership, supporting and advancing the interest of individuals age 50 plus and their families. And she's responsible for overseeing AARP Public Policy Institute, AARP Research, the Office of Policy Development Integration, Thought Leadership, and AARP International. Dr. Whitman is an international authority on aging issues with the various expertise in national policy making, both domestic and international research, as well as the political process. And as trained as an economist, she's a strategic thinker whose career has been dedicated to solving these big problems affecting both economic and health security, as well as other issues related to population aging. She previously served as the staff director for the United States Special Committee on Aging and our Senate, working across the aisle to increase retirement security, lower the cost of health care, protect seniors, safeguard consumers, as well as make the pharmaceutical industry more transparent. And prior to that, worked for the Congressional Research Service in the economics of aging. Extensively published, appearing on numerous media outlets, both master's and doctorate degrees in economics from Syracuse. And she just released her new book, The Second 50 Answers to the 7 Big Questions of Midlife and Beyond, where she explores these very important questions that we'll be talking about today with regard to age and other practical advice for living longer, healthy, more meaningful lives. Honored to have her with us today. Dr. Debra Whitman, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Thanks, Ira, for having me.
Awesome having you. Looking forward to getting into a lot of themes today. Would love to start off. I think back in 1997. I took a look at your PhD, and you were writing.
You're one of the few people that have read it.
It was kind of cool because you analyzed 4 countries at the time. You were looking at the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia, looking at social contracts, and besides looking at employment and poverty and inequality issues. Core to it was, what went into creating a strong safety net to protect the aged. And I would love to just, if you're you to take the floor for a couple of minutes, just to introduce yourself a bit more and what got you interested in this theme, sort of from the very beginning. I think it's very important.
Sure. Well, I think I'll talk about the work that I did there, which was looking at the drivers of inequality, and particularly around Eastern European countries transitioning from planned to a market economy, and just seeing how they were actually very similar to increases in inequality in a market economy. And so a lot of what I studied was sort of understanding what are the driving forces behind how we have income and how it differs across the population. What are the levers that can be used to change inequality? And really, as a microeconomist, so that was my field, is studying people and families and the implications of policy on them. So I went to Syracuse University, which is one of the top public policy schools in the country, which had me really grounded in kind of the causes behind the data. So I also had the advantage at Syracuse. It was a National Institute of Aging funded aging center. And so NIA helped fund speakers to come, every few months that were experts in the field of aging and come in and present research papers. And as a graduate student, I could go to those lectures and ask people questions. And then even further back in my life, I grew up with my grandmother. Um, so my mother was her caregiver for over 50 years, and she had schizophrenia, and I was very close to her. We had a really lovely relationship. I tried to teach her aerobics, and particularly when I was little, she would, keep me from getting in trouble. So, I've had this focus of kind of that the importance of people in the work that I do, thinking about older people as, even if they need help, they're valuable members of society. And then a real foundation on research and knowledge, and how can we bring data and science and information to the work that we do. And so all of those came together in my book. I have stories of my family, including my grandmother, Margaret. I have, not to intimidate anybody, there's 1,000 footnotes, but it doesn't read like that. I made sure all of the things I looked at were evidence-based, and then really tried to connect people's lives to the policy issues that I work on. So I can tell you a little bit about why I wrote the book, if that
Absolutely.
would be helpful
Absolutely.
to your
Absolutely.
listeners. So you gave my bio. As I said, I've been working on aging, I guess, if you count my years, we're living with my grandmother, for many, many decades, but really professionally for 25 years. And but yet I was about to turn 50, and I realized there's a whole bunch that I didn't know myself. And so I wrote down a list of questions that I wanted to know about,
Hmm.
sort of what am I going to look forward into in my second half of life? And those became the chapters of the book. So I wanted to know, some basic things like how long am I going to live? What's life expectancy look like, not just for me, but for others across the United States. What goes into life expectancy? What can we do to lengthen it? I looked at, will I be healthy? And issues around health span, and I'm sure we'll talk about geroscience, which I know is a passion of yours. I looked at some practical questions like how long will I work, and will I have enough money? And looking at our retirement systems and Social Security and retirement and savings and pensions. And then I looked at some tough things, like will I lose my memory, and cognitive decline and dementia, which people overestimate the probability that they're going to get and don't realize actually there's things they can do to reduce their risk factors. And even how will I die, which I have to say was one of my more interesting chapters to write, because I knew far little about those issues. So that's what the book is about. Is kind of a culmination of years of work, but also just talking to experts and spending hours on PubMed and reading the data. I learned a lot of things that I didn't know beforehand.
Yeah, I learned quite a bit as well going through the book. It really it has an encyclopedic amount of information, and I'm going to enjoy talking and drilling down on several of these chapters with you. One thing I just wanted to touch on before we get into the book, and obviously I went into your bio. I would love if you could talk just for a couple of minutes about the second half of life study, which was conducted with AARP and I believe National Geographic, which I think sort of and sort of looking at it, and we'll link to it in the bio of the show, sort of laid out a lot of not just the challenges, but some of the surprises that came with this particular interview. And I forget I apologize, the number of people that were in this survey, but like a lot of stuff popped up about, the optimism that people have as they grow older, which was a little more surprising. The amount of people that are optimistic as they get later on in age, and obviously the importance of relationships. Some of the, the fact that death isn't feared as much as maybe some of us would expect that are a bit younger. Talk a little bit about the second half of life study, if you would, and some of the things that you learned that, again, that led to your, led to the book.
Yeah, so I have an amazing research team that I lead here at AARP that does survey analysis. So it's a nationally representative survey, and we looked at people 40 to 100. It's hard to find a representative sample of 100-year-olds, but across the age spectrum, and asked them questions about the different chapters of the book. What was important to them? What are the things they were worried about? What were they expecting? And some of the things you just talked about really stood out, I think, to me. One is people are generally happier as they age, and this is true in broader social science research. We're our least happy in our 40s and 50s, and surprisingly most happy in our 60s, 70s, and 80s. We're also, if you ask people, "Are you healthy?" you would think that question would go way down as people age. But even people who say, yes, I have arthritis and heart disease and everything, you ask them if they're healthy and they'll say yes. And maybe that's compared to where I thought I'd be. Maybe it's compared to some other guy who's worse off than me. But the confidence that people face as they age was really heartening for me, because so many people think that aging is a time of decline and despair. And, many older people don't feel that way in real life. So we did that survey, to sort of underpin and ground the conversation that I was laying out. And our survey, really jived with all kinds of others' research on these topics.
Excellent. Excellent. So, I first ran into you, several years ago when we both served for a couple terms, I guess, on the Human Enhancement Council at the World Economic Forum. And at that time, that group consisted of people, a lot of different backgrounds. Obviously, your expertise in policy, and I know there was people there in robotics and AI and all sorts of other tools. Would love to touch on some of the learnings from the first chapter you mentioned. It's entitled "Will I Be Healthy?" and you mix a nice blend of things that we've touched on the show. On one hand, geroscience, this topic of how we could potentially delay the morbidity that comes with older age, and age tech, how we ultimately use technology to support our elders. And it was kind of interesting from the from the report, in terms of the second half of life study, the interesting part where it came to sort of, if there was this hypothetical pill that either slows aging or offers extending life by a decade, it wasn't a tremendous amount of people that were very interested in that. A little surprising from what we hear from the geroscience folks. But talk about what you learned in terms of both geroscience as well as age tech, not just from the science perspective, from where these things sit sort of from a policy angle as well.
Yeah, so I think some of it's a premature because a lot of people haven't experienced geroscience, right? We have no FDA approved medicine pill that you could take that's going to make you live healthier longer. A lot of the research is being done on animals and other models that may or may not work on humans. There's a lot of things that work on mice that don't work on humans. And so while I give a hopeful approach in the book, I'm also encouraging people to be a little cautious about what things are out there, and they're taking in the hopes that it will work. Again, having a consumer perspective, I want to make sure that people don't harm themselves with things that haven't been approved. But we, health is a really important part of our life. And as you know, we've been adding more years of life, and most of those years are not healthy years. And so the idea that we could, live healthier longer, or there's a funny book called Drop Dead Healthy, that, that's kind of a ideal state for aging. One of the things that AARP has been working on, we just had a conference with the National Academy of Medicine, and it's less about the science, and many of the people you bring on are the scientists, figuring out what interventions can be potentially impactful and studying that, but understanding what are the implications of the science, both for the broader population, for the programs, and really how it's being developed and will be eventually approved. So some sort of high level principles that we laid out were things like making sure we don't say aging is a disease. And the reason is because all older people, or after a certain birthday, not everybody is diseased. And in fact, the best intervention to increase your lifespan and your health span is actually to have a positive view on aging. If you believe aging is a positive thing, you live 7.5 years longer, you have lower risk of heart disease, even your brain volume and your risk of dementia goes down. So, the biological functions associated with aging lead to disease. We don't have a problem with that. We just don't want to stigmatize people because of their age. We also, think that the focus should be on increasing health span, not lifespan. Just having people live longer in poor health shouldn't be the goal of the science. And I think the scientists agree with that one too. And the other thing is we have huge disparities. Back to what I studied in graduate school, we have huge disparities across the population, both in how long we live and how healthy we'll be as we age. So people in the top 1% of wealth live over a decade longer than people in the bottom 1%. And, we don't need just the people who live longer to live even longer, leaving people further and further behind. And there's huge racial and ethnic disparities across longevity, educational disparities across longevity. All of those I lay out in my book. So thinking about using geroscience to reduce disparities should be a major goal. We need to make sure that treatments are affordable. Back to, if only billionaires can afford to live, 2 or 3 decades longer, and everybody else can't take the interventions, then we're not doing a good job in the field. We need to be transparent about the approval process, what the endpoints are, how much people are improving their health. And then finally, geroscience shouldn't be the only way we think about healthy longevity.
Right.
Exercise, diet, all kinds of reducing air pollution, all kinds of other ways we can help improve healthy longevity. And so geroscience should be a piece of that puzzle. So those are the kind of principles as we think about this emerging science that we want to make sure we're talking about even before the first treatment comes to be approved, right? So that we can sort of shape the dialogue about even, how do you do clinical trials and make sure you have a diverse population. So a range of the causes of aging are examined as part of the treatment. And so it was a really great conversation. I think we'll be continuing to work with the National Academy of Medicine and others, the National Institute of Aging, to think through these broader social and societal implications.
Excellent. And you mentioned just before, we do not have any at this point FDA approved gerotherapeutics on the market. In terms of cognitive health, we may have a few, but they're not that great yet. And my former industry isn't that great at producing them yet. Hopefully we'll get a lot better. But you mentioned your concern about cognitive health, and there is a chapter, Will I Lose My Memory? Would love to talk about some of your learnings here. I mean, we're I don't know, a couple couple of years ago now, I had Charlotte Yeh on the show when she was chief medical officer at AARP Services, talking about some of the low-hanging fruit that we don't normally think of, just things like hearing aids and the inability to hear, how that affects our cognitive performance. And the number was kind of startling, when hearing aids go wrong, how things get very bad very quickly. And maybe we don't look at the lower hanging fruit as much as we should. What are some of the things that you learned in your discussions with thought leaders in this space? Because this is, needless to say, an area like you had of major concern. Yes, we're dealing with heart disease and cancer, but we got a lot of interventions there. Cognitive and performance, not as much yet. And love to hear some of your thoughts on this matter.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up hearing in particular, but there's a lot of people don't realize that they can lower their risk factors, and globally we can lower risk factors by over 40%. And that's doing things like making sure people are physically active, they don't smoke, have a healthy diet, looking at things like air pollution, and even hearing. And the data that we have is that hearing loss contributes about 7% of dementias worldwide. And most people don't realize it's even an issue. And if you use a hearing aid, you have an almost 20% reduction in the risk of cognitive decline. And so I was actually working out and talking to my instructor, and she had somebody in her family that was, really becoming isolated and pulled back because they couldn't hear anything and they couldn't afford hearing aids. And so we talked through, just how important it was to try to get them something so that they can, and it's a piece of it is the isolation. It's not just your brain not being able to hear, but people withdrawing and not having that contact, because we actually know social isolation is another risk factor for dementia. So there's a lot that we can be doing. And I think, again, absence of a magic pill, people need to understand how these healthy behaviors or taking care of their hearing can make a big difference on their brain health.
Excellent. You mentioned the social isolation there, and I thought this is a quite interesting segue to your chapter entitled "How Long Will I Work?" and you bring two very important themes together here. One, work is important. It keeps us engaged. It keeps us connected. And we've been profiling some of these I'll call them sort of third age education institutes like the University of Seniors at the American University of Beirut, Modern Elder Academy, and then there's another interesting part of this chapter where you profile the I have no number was this big, $600 billion of unpaid work of 50 million Americans taking care of our elder friends and relatives. Two very important topics we don't hear as much about as I think we should. Talk a little bit about not just the need for lifelong learning, but also the need for, I guess, learning in general and how we take care of our elders, for friends and relatives, and ultimately potentially get paid for it at some point, because it's a major piece of the economy that I guess we don't think as much about as we should.
Yeah, I think, I threw a lot of things in the work chapter because they hit us before we're retired. And so a couple of things to think about there. One is a lot of people love their jobs. They find a lot of mental stimulation from them, which again is important for their cognitive abilities. They have community at work, so that helps them with isolation, and they love what they do, and so it's a sense of purpose. Those are all great jobs, right? And many people want to maintain them. And I have friends whose parents are working into their 70s and 80s because any one of those things matter. There's the other side, Ira, which is many people have to work. They don't have a good job. They have to stand on their feet all day, and as their bodies are getting harder and harder to move. They don't have anything saved for retirement. So if they don't work, they can't pay for basic expenses. Their job isn't very stimulating. They may face age discrimination at it, which is harmful for our personal health. So, so I don't want to say work is all the same for all of us as we age. And so we really need to be thinking through, how do we create solutions for different people,
Mm-hmm.
particularly people whose health or the demands of their work is really physically demanding. How do we help them actually exit the labor force, which is more healthy than staying in it? Um, and then across the age group, we've done one on college students who are caregivers, and how universities need to be thinking differently about helping support student family caregivers, to working with a lot of employers to think about, how do you have caregiving leave, which we have at AARP. So if I need to take care of my dad, I can actually use paid time off for that. Or even workplace flexibility. We've seen a huge rise in the number of people with disabilities who are able to telework. So there's a rise in labor force participation by people with disabilities if they don't have to, commute
Yep.
and maybe have assisted technologies and things at their fingertips that they're able to use. And so the workplace is a really important part of thinking about an aging society. And that's really kind of the message of the book is this is happening. Demographic change is going to change the face of the planet. And we're not prepared for it because we're not really thinking about all the intricacies and how it affects people across their life
Right.
course. And if we do that, and if we create a society that helps support people to work longer and help support family caregivers if they have to move in and out of the workforce, if we end age discrimination so people who want or need to work longer can continue to find jobs that will hire them, the issues around an aging society are far less. And so those are the types of things where, sticking our head in the sand and ignoring these problems doesn't make them go away. In fact, it just makes them worse.
Got it. Got it. Um, speaking of life course and the later part of it, one of the very interesting findings, again, going back to the second half of life study for a minute, was this. Well, the couple of things. One, the fact that in the data, the fear of death significantly diminished over time with age, but there was this desire, of course, not to be in pain and to be at peace upon death. And it's quite interesting because I've been here before with several relatives, and looking at, because obviously the palliative care side of things is slightly different from the hospice component. And I saw hospice. We are pretty good at getting rid of pain and putting people at peace. The palliative care side was kind of shocking to me in a couple different cases in my own experiences, that sort of in between, okay, we have nothing else for your terminal illness and end of life hospice care, was a decent amount of time where it was kind of difficult to get interventions. I mean, I saw the benefit of just a couple blood transfusions on my father-in-law, who was fighting metastatic prostate cancer. I mean, it turned things around for him for a couple of months there, but it's still very difficult to, just get a bag of blood once in a while. And I'm just interested, what are some of the things that you're learning about in terms of what we need to be doing on both the palliative care, but also the hospice care models moving forward where we are now?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, again, these were areas I knew a little bit about, but really learned a lot from the experts, and
Mhm.
understanding palliative care is about not just treating the disease,
Yeah.
and the body part that, not just, treating the prostate, but the person. And
Right.
what is it that we can do to improve their health and their quality of life based on what's meaningful to them? And you're right. Once people qualify for hospice, which provide palliative care, they're not totally synonymous, because you can get palliative
Right.
care at any stage in a disease. It's just actually caring for the person. Hospice, we have pretty strict rules. You have to have a certain number of months to live. For the most part, you have to give up any curative treatment, which sometimes some of that curative treatment actually reduces the symptoms, which makes you live better, right? So I don't know
Right.
if that was the issue with the blood.
Yep.
But you have to have, certain doctor's approvals, and there's just a lot of hoops that you have to go through. Um, and then oftentimes families don't are afraid of the term hospice because they feel like that's giving up, or doctors are afraid to have the conversation about the benefits of hospice. And so for many people, they are on it for a few weeks. The average, I think, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I think it's less than a month. And so, the things that could be helping people's life be a little bit more comfortable aren't being given to them until almost too late.
Yeah.
So I try to raise some of these issues, and again, talking with the experts for that chapter, I interviewed a hospice nurse about what it was like to sit with somebody as they're dying. My husband was lucky enough to be with both of his parents as they passed, but I'm a little scared of it, right? I've never watched anybody die other than, scary, gory movies where people just drop off. And so really talking to somebody about what types of stages people go through. And it's not the same for everybody. I get that. But even just couldn't find books out there that explained that basic fact of life. And so that was really helpful. And also talking to a widow about what it's like to lose your partner, somebody that you've loved your whole life. And we know actually the chance of dying right after somebody close to you has died goes way up. You can literally die of a broken heart.
Mm.
And so that what was interesting. And then I want to tell one last story because it's one of my
Please.
favorites. Um, Partly the best part, you mentioned I work on international issues, is usually once a year, me and a couple of people on my team, we go to another country and study how they're looking at aging and find new ideas that maybe we can bring back to the US or share with the rest of the world. And so we were in New Zealand, specifically looking at how they deal with the Maori population and
Okay.
disparities in health, and how are they thinking about really addressing the differences in health and longevity across populations. But we stopped to meet with the Kiwi Coffin Club.
Hmm.
Um, these were a group of older adults who this woman Katie had went to their local college continuing ed, and they said, well, what classes would you like us to offer? And she raised her hand and she said, I want to learn how to decorate my own coffin. And the administrators were like, and afterwards, like 10 people went up to Katie and said, actually, that sounds really interesting. Can we join you in that? And so she started this club, and it's bit arts and crafts. They have stencils and paints and all kinds of things. It's part social club. They have a club room where they have tea and games and hang out. And it's part charity. They also decorate coffins for children with cancer or for help with families who can't afford expensive coffins. And so it was a lovely way for people to just talk about
Cool.
death in it's going to happen, and I want to be in a box that represents me, right?
Right.
So it was, I think, a really positive view on the end of life. And back to the survey is, as we age, we're less afraid of death. We know it's coming. We've seen other people die. And the fear of it, I think, becomes just more of a reality. We accept we have a limited time on the planet.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's again, I appreciated that chapter, especially based on some of what I experienced, and yeah, I mean, it's again, as you're pointing, when we talk about this whole life course, I mean, there's so many facets to it, and it brings me back to something. I'm going to loop back in time here, but then I'll come forward again. One of the things I mentioned that it was, in early in your bio was that you did spend time on the Hill, United States Senate Special Committee on Aging, and so many of things we're talking about here impact so many areas of our federal government. As you were mentioning, NIA at the NIH, obviously we have HHS and Medicare and Social Security and the Administration for Community Living and so forth. I peeked into the congressional record at a lot of what you were doing back then, and you were publishing on sort of everything on the Hill in terms of your papers on going hungry in America, issues for seniors, what seniors should deal with dietary supplements, how we take care of mom and dad with a proper quality workforce. Can you say a few words of not just because you point out this is policy combines economics and data and science. What was it like for you being on the Hill then, and a little bit of sort of where are we in 2025 with how aging is handled on the Hill in this kind? I mean, it's kind of a nebulous thing that we don't normally get into, but I'd love to get your perspective on it as the head of policy of an organization like AARP that represents 40 plus million Americans. I'm one of them now on the Hill to push some of these issues forward.
Yeah, so let me start with explaining what the Senate Aging Committee is, because many people don't understand the committee structure
Sure.
of Congress, and there's only one in the Senate, there isn't one in the House. And
Yeah.
so the Senate Aging Committee is a non-legislative committee, which means you can write legislation, but it has to go to the committees of jurisdiction to actually pass it.
Yep.
That's a little bit important when I'll talk about strategy in a second. It also had subpoena power. So we did investigations and could subpoena documents. And so some of the work that we did was to try and showcase problems and use investigations to try and raise up an issue's attention. And then we also could hold hearings. And what was great about it is it's long been a less partisan committee. And so both the chair and the ranking, whether it's a Republican or Democrat in whichever seat, take turns. The chair gets a few more turns than the ranking member in order to hold hearings. Every bill that I worked on while I was there was bipartisan, and usually with I worked for a Democrat at the time, so it was with a Republican from the Committee of Jurisdiction. So that whatever legislation we wrote then would have a pathway forward through theirs. And we did things on looking at retirement savings and how do you make it easy to save for retirement or stop bad things from happening. I did a bill looking at how pharmaceutical companies and drug companies pay doctors and making that transparent. And so it was a lovely place and time to work because there was a lot of bipartisanship and problem solving. And I still think that exists. The Aging Committee still exists. They're going to have new leadership coming up. And they've always been a place to look at these issues and that cross the jurisdictions, as you said. They cross health and they cross retirement and care, and sometimes that was important to raise it outside the committee that might have been looking at a particular piece of legislation that had to move quickly based on the work that they were doing. So we could be a little bit more creative and strategic. The issues of an aging society are still important. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, housing, transportation, nutrition, all of those things are a key part of the federal budget. They are major drivers of the economy. And yet, I think people often look at them as a program rather than what is the population who's aging need. And so
Right.
that's a little bit of the shift that I'm trying to do on my book is, yes, those programs are important and we need to make sure that they're expanding and growing over time as the needs of the population grow. So I got to work on Medicare Part D, which is the drug bill that was added to
Yep.
Medicare in the early 2000s because Medicare didn't cover pharmaceuticals before that. So things have added and changed over time, but we need to take the issues of aging society even more seriously. And that's the final chapter, which hopefully some people will read and sort of provides an outline of the specific things that we need to do that I've raised in the earlier chapters.
Absolutely. And the name of that chapter is the solutions for the better second 50. Would love for you to touch on what I mean. Obviously, everyone should pick up the book, but please take us into that chapter, specific things that you'd love to touch on, surprises again that you along the way, and then again looping back to where we started out. We talked about Czech Republic and Hungary and Poland and Slovakia at the beginning. When we were on the human enhancement thing a couple of years ago, I don't know if you remember, one of the members of that council was Ambassador Lorca from Costa Rica, and they're doing some really fascinating stuff down there in terms of making aging sort of a central theme in that country. Interesting models that you may, as you mentioned, you found AARP International. Are there other models out there that we as the United States should be looking at that are doing things more efficiently, better, unique? I mean, take us out internationally as well, if you would, as we get into the wrap up, and what are other some of the exciting things that you say, wow,
Yeah, so my biggest solution in the final chapter is that we need a national plan for aging well in America.
right,
And this, I'll just be blunt, is me sort of punting because it's not one thing. Like you can't just do
right,
one thing and solve all of the problems that I've raised in the book. You really need a comprehensive plan. And in fact, there are many countries that have these national plans and that are taking it seriously. And so I use the example of Singapore, which,
yep,
its size is not even close to the United States, but they've been really thinking about their aging society. And you raised lifelong learning earlier, and some of the past guests you have, they actually have both gave money to every single person to be used for education, regardless of their age. They have silver academies for older people, specifically designed to help train people as they age.
yep,
They've topped those up for older people because they realize, many of us who were trained in our 20s and 30s in college need more training as we age. And so that's just one sphere. They look at their health and long-term care programs. And so I'm stealing from them a little bit, and also from things that are going on in the United States. We have pushed across the country the World Health Organization's model for age-friendly cities and communities.
yep.
And so now we have, is it 4 or 600? I feel like it's 600, but I'm going to say four just to be on the low side. Cities and communities across the country who have come up with plans for their communities based on what that community needs around transportation and housing and healthcare, social engagement, and other domains. And we have states that are coming up with these national aging plans. California has one, several other states too. And so that's really what I'm calling for, is that we need to put together the Congress, back to my friends on the Hill, actually pass legislation as part of the Older Americans Act to create a national strategy.
Mhm.
This last end of May or June, the Biden administration put out a sort of framework for a national strategy. So we'll see if that gets picked up. Again, I don't think the issues of planning are partisan. So
Right.
let's hope the new administration sort of embraces the need to do this planning as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be an interesting time. Um, that being said, Deb, what else is coming up for you that we should be aware of? I mean, I know, sort of looking online, you're not just involved with all sort of the AARP things and conferences, but sort of non-AARP stuff, maybe book signings, other talks you're going to be giving. Anything else on your calendar that's public facing that we should know about while we have you today, please? Take the floor.
The timing of our conversation is when the wildfires are going on in Los Angeles. So I was supposed to be there next week, and I've just canceled that trip. So hopefully I'll be back in LA at Zibby's bookstore and some other places, Gen Space, that I was going to be. My heart goes out to everybody in California and other places who are experiencing these national disasters.
Definitely. Well, it was awesome having you again. I've looked forward to talking to you for a while now. I'm glad we finally got a chance to do this show, but I'm excited about what's going on at the organization. I very much enjoyed the book, and I look forward to continue following you and all the exciting things that are going to be happening, not just AARP on the policy front, but what's going to be happening on the Hill. And look forward to continue following. Wish you and your team the best with all this as you move it forward. Again, for everybody that is going to be listening to this episode of our show across the various podcast networks, or who'll be watching on our YouTube channel. Again, you've been spending time with Dr. Debra Whitman, Executive Vice President, Chief Public Policy Officer, AARP. Pick up a copy of The Second 50, Answers to the Seven Big Questions of Midlife and Beyond. Deb, again, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while. Thank you for everything you do for all of us and members. And as we like to say in our show, thanks for creating a better tomorrow for so many people out there via the types of things you do. Really awesome story.
Thanks, Ira, for having me. It was a great conversation.